I want you to think about the person you trust most with your life. Not a friend, not a partner, the person who knows your body, your history, your fears, your worst moments of vulnerability. The person sitting across from you in a quiet room who has access to every part of you that you have never shown anyone else. Your doctor. Dr. Nathan Cole was my doctor for 8 months before he became my boyfriend. He was my boyfriend for 14 months before I discovered he had been lying to me from the very first day he asked me to dinner. What he did was not just cheating. What he did was weaponize every piece of trust I had ever placed in a person who wore a white coat and took an oath and sat across from me while I told him things I had never told anyone. The medical licensing board revoked his license 11 months after I walked into their offices. He did not see that coming. He should have. I started seeing Dr. Nathan Cole 18 months ago for severe anxiety. Not a crisis, just the accumulating weight of a stressful year that had started affecting my sleep, my appetite, my ability to function at the level I expected of myself. My regular doctor referred me. She said Dr. Cole was excellent, warm, thorough, genuinely invested in his patients. She had referred several people to him, and they had all spoken highly of him. She was right about all of it. He was warm. He was thorough. He was invested. What she did not know, what none of his colleagues knew, was exactly what that investment looked like behind closed doors. Dr. Nathan Cole was 36 years old, objectively attractive in the way that confidence and a good suit can make a man attractive, regardless of anything else. He had a way of making you feel, in those 50-minute sessions, like you were the only person in the world. Like your particular combination of fears and hopes and contradictions was the most interesting thing he had encountered. I now understand that this was not a gift. It was a skill, practiced, deliberate, deployed with precision on women who came to him at their most vulnerable. After my 3rd session, he walked me to the reception desk. Not standard practice, I would later learn. And as I was leaving, he said something that I replayed for days afterward. Claire, outside of this room, I know this is completely outside the lines, and I would understand completely if you said no, but I would very much like to take you for coffee sometime, as 2 people, not in any professional capacity. I said yes. I said yes because he was charming, and I was lonely, and I did not yet understand that a doctor asking his patient out is not a spontaneous, romantic gesture. It is a pattern. Dating Nathan was, I want to be honest about this, wonderful. For a long time, it was genuinely wonderful. He was attentive in the way that a man who has been trained to listen is attentive. He remembered every detail. He asked follow-up questions about things I had mentioned weeks earlier. He made me feel seen in a way I had not felt in years. He transferred my medical care to a colleague the week after we started dating, making the relationship technically proper in terms of professional ethics. I respected that. It seemed like a man who understood lines and respected them. I did not know that the line he was most careful about was never the one I thought. We dated for 14 months. I met his friends, his sister, his mother, who cooked for me twice, and told me I was exactly what Nathan needed. I was fully integrated into his life, or what I believed was his life. What I did not know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that a woman named Rebecca had also been fully integrated into his life for the past 6 months. Rebecca, who was also his former patient. Rebecca, who had also been asked for coffee after a session. Rebecca, who was also sitting in his apartment on Thursday evenings when I believed he was at a hospital committee meeting. And Rebecca was not the first. She was the third. He had done this before, twice. The same script, the same coffee invitation, the same transfer of medical care to make it seem appropriate, the same relationship that lasted just long enough before the next patient caught his attention. I found all of this out on a Sunday afternoon when Rebecca called me. Rebecca had found my number through a mutual contact, a friend of Nathan's who had met us both at separate occasions, and had finally put together what neither of us had been allowed to see. She called me on a Sunday at 2 in the afternoon. She was crying before I said hello. She told me she had been dating Nathan for 6 months. She told me she had been his patient before that. Anxiety, the same as me. She told me about the coffee invitation after the third session, the transfer to a colleague, the Thursday evenings. I listened to every word without saying anything. When she finished, I asked her one question. I said, "Rebecca, was he your doctor when you first started having feelings for him?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, but he made me feel like it was mutual, like it was real." I said, "It probably felt real to me too. I need to tell you something." I told her about the 2 previous women, information the mutual friend had shared. I told her she and I were numbers 3 and 4 in a pattern that Nathan had been running since at least the beginning of his private practice. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "What do we do?" And I said, "We make sure he never does this to anyone else." We stayed on the phone for 3 more hours. By the time we hung up, we had a plan. Rebecca and I spent 2 weeks building our case. We contacted the mutual friend who had connected us. Through him, we found the names of the 2 previous women, Jessica and Lauren, both former patients, both approached after their third session, both transferred to a colleague before the relationship began. Jessica agreed to speak with us immediately. Lauren needed more time, but eventually joined our conversation. 4 women, 4 former patients, 1 doctor, 1 identical script. We gathered everything we had. Messages from Nathan. The early ones where he had been careful, but not careful enough. Where the language of attraction had bled into the professional space before any transfer had occurred. Dates that showed the pattern. Timelines that proved this was not spontaneous connection, but calculated selection. I also went back through my own memory with new eyes. The things Nathan had known about me during our relationship that he should not have known if he had truly transferred my care completely. Details about my medical history that my new doctor had never been told. Specific fears I had disclosed only in sessions. Fears that Nathan had referenced casually in conversation months later, as if they were things I had told him personally. He had not transferred my records cleanly. He had retained access to my medical file throughout our relationship. That was not just a personal betrayal. That was a criminal violation of patient confidentiality. I called a medical ethics lawyer on a Wednesday morning. She called it, and I remember this word exactly, watertight. I broke up with Nathan before we filed anything. Not because he deserved the warning. He did not. But because I needed to look at him one final time as myself, not as a case, not as a complainant, as Claire, the woman he had chosen from a waiting room and decided was useful. I asked to meet him at the restaurant where he had taken me on our first date. He came thinking it was a normal evening. He was wearing the shirt I had told him once was my favorite. He had made a reservation. I waited until he had sat down, until he had smiled at me across the table with that particular smile, the one that had made me feel chosen, which I now understood was the professional-grade warmth of a man who had practiced it on 4 women before me. I placed a folder on the table. I said, I have spoken to Rebecca, and Jessica, and Lauren, and a fourth woman whose name I am not going to tell you because she asked me not to. I have spoken to a medical ethics lawyer, and I want you to know, before you say anything, that the Medical Licensing Board receives our formal complaint on Friday morning. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. He said, Claire, what I felt for you was real. It was always real. I said, Nathan, you retained access to my medical file for 14 months while we were in a relationship. You used information from my patient records in our personal conversations. That is not love. That is not even close to love. That is a criminal violation dressed as romance, and I hope the board explains the difference to you in detail. I stood up. I said, enjoy the reservation, and I left. He called me 11 times that night. I did not answer once. 4 women walked into the Medical Licensing Board offices on a Friday morning. Jessica, Lauren, Rebecca, and me. We had never all been in the same room before that morning. We stood in the lobby looking at each other, 4 strangers connected by one man's pattern and one collective decision that what he had done could not be allowed to continue. Rebecca was shaking slightly. I held her hand. Lauren had brought a folder thicker than mine. Jessica had not slept. None of us had really slept. We went in together. The formal investigation took 11 months. Nathan hired lawyers. He argued that each relationship had been consensual and initiated only after proper transfer of care. He submitted documentation. He called character witnesses. What he could not explain away was the retained file access. What he could not explain away was the pattern. 4 women, identical approach, identical timeline, identical method. What he could not explain away was a text message recovered during the investigation in which he had described to a colleague, in language that made the investigator read it twice, his approach to identifying patients who were emotionally vulnerable enough to be receptive to personal attention. He had written it down. He had actually written it down. The board revoked his medical license on a Thursday morning, 11 months after we walked through their doors. The decision was published publicly, as all licensing board decisions are, with a full summary of the findings. His name, his clinic, his method, all of it. Public record. Permanent. He cannot practice medicine anywhere in this country. He cannot sit across from another woman in a quiet room and use her vulnerability against her. Not anymore. People ask me if I blame myself for saying yes to the coffee, for not seeing it sooner, for trusting someone in a position of power who used that position as a tool. No. And I want to be very direct about why. What Nathan did was not spontaneous attraction that crossed a line. It was a deliberate system. He selected vulnerable patients. He built trust over sessions specifically designed to lower defenses. He used the intimacy of the therapeutic space to manufacture a feeling of being uniquely understood. And then he deployed that manufactured feeling to pursue a romantic outcome that served him. That is not something I should have seen through. That is something he should never have done. The difference matters. If you are in a therapeutic or medical relationship with someone and something about their behavior feels like it is crossing a professional boundary, trust that feeling. A doctor who makes you feel special in a way that does not feel clinical. A therapist whose attention feels personal rather than professional. Any professional in a position of care who seems to be building something that belongs outside their office. Trust the discomfort, report it. You are not imagining it, and you are not being dramatic. Rebecca and I still speak regularly. Jessica moved to another city and built something wonderful. Lauren became an advocate for patient rights in medical settings. She turned what was done to her into something that protects other people. I am proud to know all three of them. We walked into that building as strangers. We walked out as something that does not have a clean name, but feels very much like family. If this story reached you, leave a comment, especially if you have ever been in a situation where someone in a position of trust crossed a line and you were not sure if what you felt was real. It was real. And if you are new here, subscribe. Because every week on this channel, we tell the stories that people are most afraid to tell. And this one needed to be told.